Hello and welcome to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke, an ongoing discussion about ideas and current events where we seek to discover the underlying connections and root causes which shape our lives. As we clarify what is true, we continually recalibrate our discernment filter and re-energize our commitment and courage for helpful conversations in a hostile culture. You're laughing.
It just gets longer and longer.
No. That's like a couple words longer. I don't know if I like the last sentence of that.
Recalibrate our discernment. I mean, I don't disagree with any of it.
I know. It's not the best words. I had the word filter. I just added. I don't know what to call it. A discernment. We're doing something as we talk about what we see.
Right.
We're exercising a filter of discernment, and we're talking about it. And you change it, adjust it. It rubs against another person, knocks off some corners. You think, oh, maybe that wasn't good. Maybe I saw something I thought I did, but I didn't, you know.
My 15-year-old son was listening to us this afternoon. We're trying to take, this is a challenge, we're trying to take a week and have no screens.
Oh, okay.
And also no headphones. Because our tendency, mine included, is to walk around with headphones on and listen to stuff, right?
Okay.
Podcasts,
All right.
books on tape, all that. So it was like, we're going to listen to our thoughts. We're going to read books. If we're bored or do things, but no screens to entertain us, nothing to stop. So he's listening to his phone on the table, the podcast out loud, right? Like, I can live with that.
It's pushing the boundaries.
Yeah. So I walked by him and I said, Max, he's 15, going on 16. You know, when Mike and I disagree, who do you tend to agree with most? And he goes, you. And I was like, yes. We'll see if it
Unfair
lasts.
question. There's
We'll see if it lasts.
there's inherent
You should
power
ask him.
dynamics.
You should
in
ask
those
him and see if
questions.
it's true.
That's right. Well, today we're going to talk a little bit about the Republican speakership battle. We'll touch a little bit on the topic of feminism, something we seem to keep coming back to periodically, and a little bit about some civic elements in our culture today. But let's start with an opening question, a quick opening question.
Okay.
This is a DeSantis question. So in the article there in the news recently, DeSantis Airlines, there was an article about DeSantis saying, "Hey, we're gonna bring home some people from Israel
Like
that are
300.
stuck over there."
Yeah.
Adam Kinzinger gets on and tweets against him.
Who's Adam Kinzinger?
He's a Rhino Republican who has been he was part of the January 6th committee along with Liz Cheney.
Okay.
So he was one of the people basically that
Trump derangement syndrome.
D what? What is it when you commit treason? D something. I'm getting old.
Deconstructed. He deconstructed his faith in
it's when
America.
you betray. That's the word I was thinking. Betray.
Oh, yeah.
He betrayed his party. In any case, he texts or tweets and says, "Come on, Ron, you have no power here." Roll eye emoji. And in a sense, he's right. He's a state. He has no power to get involved with this international thing, right? Well, 16 hours later, DeSantis, a plane from Florida, comes back with 270 people, Americans. The
Stranded.
DeSantis and his wife, they meet him there. They welcome them home. And the question of
100 of them are kids, right?
I didn't read all the details, but here's the question. So there's the Adam Kinzinger quote, which is so interesting, the irony here. But here's the on second thought question.
Okay.
What is clearly seen is leadership by DeSantis to make this happen.
That's his main strength.
It is his best gift that we've seen as the governor of Florida especially. And he's trying to say, hey, I can do this as your president, right? All right.
Yeah.
There's his claim. The problem is he's not campaigned well, and he has been in decline. In some states, what's her name, has passed him now in second place.
Haley.
Nikki
Haley.
And there's projections, there's thoughts that he's going to be quitting soon. So this is my observation. I don't know if you agree with it or not, but I love his leadership.
Yep.
I liked it when he got into the race. I thought it was healthy, but he hasn't seemed to campaign and resonate with people. Why is that? Do you think that's true? It's a question. Do you think that's true? And if so, what do you think's going on there?
So there's two campaigns going on. Generally, there's the national campaign that we follow, which actually doesn't matter that much at this stage in the game. And then there's the state-by-state campaigns.
Okay.
So Iowa and New Hampshire right now are all that matters. And then it'll move on from there down into South Carolina, and then I think the Super Tuesday, and we'll be in March by then. And by Super Tuesday, after that's over, it's usually decided, right?
Okay.
So what national polls say it doesn't actually matter. What I see and hear about in Iowa is DeSantis holding a strong ground, that he's got tens of thousands of people signing saying they're committed to caucus for him on the night. I think he's got a chance. So I think what matters about DeSantis is his actions. I don't know like I've heard people say his campaign's not strong. I don't even know what that means. Like, what is it? What, he doesn't have fancy events, or like the commercials aren't quality? Who cares? Like, when he can do this stuff, that's what's going to matter. When you hear him speak, that's what's going to matter.
So you're rejecting my premise in a little bit. You're saying my premise is based on the national perspective, and that doesn't really fit for this primary process, which, okay, that may be.
When you say his campaign hasn't done well, and I've heard other people say that, what do you mean? What have you seen?
Yeah, so I was going to clarify then. What if I rephrased it and said this? As a person who has seen this leadership thing in his state and rejoiced in it,
Yep.
and then this DeSantis Airlines moment comes up like, that's the stuff I love to see. And yet, my personal take has been he's been flat. He's like a soda that's set out and it's flat.
But when have you seen flatness?
The whole campaign process after the initial opening, get into it. I have not felt, so this is a subjective take on my part.
Yeah.
But I don't think I'm the only one thinking this, and so
no, you're definitely not.
I'm calling it like this campaigning component versus leadership. I don't know.
So you're thinking of, because I've seen him at the debates hold his own, not do amazing. Is that kind of what you're thinking of?
I didn't even
like. What's the flatness?
Yeah. I don't really know if I know. Maybe it's not charismatic.
But when are you seeing this? In commercials?
Okay, so no.
Because if you're not watching the debate, you're not seeing commercials. What, you're just hearing what other people say.
That's a good question. What's providing the data? His early on as governor, okay, maybe I would say this. His early on governor leadership, part of his leadership was communication with media, communication, stuff he was doing with the universities that they're trying to rejuvenate, stuff he was doing with the Disney stuff, the stuff, the gay legislation attacks he was under, these kinds of parameters. In all of them, I thought his communication was outstanding.
Yep.
Very direct, very, he was the governor speaking as the governor. It was leadership communication.
Right.
Now, when he goes into another mode of campaign communication, I feel like it's not the same.
I remember listening like to Ted Cruz when Ted Cruz was going.
He doesn't excite me. He doesn't energize me. He doesn't make me feel like, oh man, I want him to take this.
And so it's just moments in passing, clips that you hear of him. Is that what
well?
You're
I
saying?
think it's all the time. I've never anything he said. I've never has seen a communication in his campaign process that made me feel like when he's communicating as governor and leading.
It doesn't have that same authority.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
Whereas when Trump speaks on the campaign trail, in the arenas, events, whatever, it's electrifying. I don't care if you don't like, forget that you don't like him as much as I like him. Forget that dynamic.
Right. He's a showman.
It is.
He knows how to connect and rile up.
And I have to say, I don't like him so much this time around versus 2016 or even 2020. Right. What's happening right now is a little different. He seems to not have the same kind of pizzazz, but it's still more than the others.
Yeah. Well, I think he's also caught up in a lot of legal issues that are taking his time.
I can't even. Yeah.
One of the things I heard this week about DeSantis, he's, as far as I know, the only candidate who has said openly that we're not interested in taking any Palestinian refugees to America.
Those kinds of, as Florida, we being Florida.
Yeah, but he's also saying, and he was on MSNBC saying, no, we shouldn't as America. If I'm president, we won't.
Yeah.
And they puch back, right? How dare you? And this is racist and all that.
Yep.
And he was just really like matter of fact. And what he said was, these are people who were raised from young childhood to hate and want to kill Jews.
Yeah, that's right.
And their mentality is not American. And to bring them here is to invite the same kind of chaos and destruction.
The Hamas election by Palestinians in Gaza is 90%.
Yeah.
Who knows how much corruption there is in that balloting, but that's a massive percent. Right. It is the citizenry of Gaza that has selected Hamas as their leader.
Well, think of the number of people in the U.S. who have been out celebrating what Hamas has done.
Yeah.
And you say, well, let's bring in another 2 million of those people.
Yeah. Did you happen to see the Twitter conversation with the conversation with Tucker Carlson and the Polish president?
Recently?
Yeah.
No,
in the last 3 or 4 days. Basically, he's being accused of being racist within the European environment because they've made the statements. Palestinians are not welcome here.
Right.
Arabs are not welcome as a part of an illegal immigration process. If you want to apply, you go through our processes, but you're not welcome here. And he
Yeah.
says that's why it's safe to be in Poland.
Right.
And
well,
it's just shocking.
The rallies that have gone on in the U.S., I think there was 1,000 people in Portland rallying in favor of the Palestinian Hamas invasion. The ones in Europe are 10 times, 100 times the scale.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's shocking.
Yeah. So what do you think, back to this thing, do you think there's anything, do you feel, okay, I hear from you that you feel something of what I'm saying about DeSantis. You're poking at it saying how valid is it versus subjective, which is fair.
Yeah.
But I also can see that you feel something. Do you have any response to that something that's there?
Well, part of what I see is a lot of people in the Trump
primary process.
You know, there's like the sunk cost fallacy. Do you know what that is?
No, I don't.
It's that, like, I've already watched half the movie. I may as well watch the rest.
Okay.
And because I've sunk this cost into it, when in reality, I've already wasted an hour. Now I may as well waste another hour. Like, that doesn't make sense, right? So once we're invested in something, we have an incentive to keep it, wanting it to be successful because it makes us feel successful, even when we're not sure.
Yeah.
So what I see in the Trump sphere is this, like, there's a lot of excitement. There always has, because he gets the excitable people going a lot more than, like, DeSantis is kind of a nerd, right? He wants to get the details right. He's figured out a solution, and then he's going to make it happen. But he's not out there riling up the crowd and getting everybody going. That's just not, he's not going to do that. And I think this is the question of, like, okay, is America serious or not about wanting a better future, or do we just want to make our enemies mad?
So when you look back at Bush, who won 2 terms, in a sense, you could say similar. He wasn't a super inspiring individual. You take the control.
He wasn't a nerd either.
He wasn't a nerd, but his faculty of language. I mean, he in a sense, like Biden, his tongue would slip and say things that he didn't intend. Right? He was easily poked fun at, the Bushisms and all that.
Right.
So you have a similarity there, but there was no Trump-like figure that just takes the oxygen out of the room.
Well, I mean, he just broke politics completely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you can compare anybody.
All right. Well, I'm not sure if we resolve that, but if you're enjoying the podcast or the questions where we're started, we would just say, hey, click like, click subscribe, and it'll let you know when a new one's coming. Leave a review, share with a friend. But let's get going forward. Okay. I do have a pop culture thing.
Ooh.
Just an observation.
I do too.
Do you?
Yep.
All right. Give me yours. We'll make them fast, though.
Okay. So I was watching a video on YouTube, not YouTube, Instagram, one of the ones you flip through, right? Quick ones to give us all ADD. And it was a video of this little kid, and the dad is obviously videoing him. Okay. He's behind the camera. And the dad's trying to talk to him. And he says, hey, look at me, look at me. And the kid his eyes are going every which way. And he's saying, no, I want to tell you something. And he gets half a sentence in, and the kid wants to change the subject or start telling a story about what that reminded him of. And it's like 60 seconds of just the struggle.
Deficit.
And I put a comment on that video that got, I think we're at 60 likes, which is like a lot, you know, for me.
Yeah.
And I just wrote, dads are the cure to ADHD. That because what that dad was doing, right? In fact, there was another one that was about people with ADHD. They need structure and they hate being told what to do, and that's like this eternal struggle between them. And I'm like, that's exactly what dads are.
Yeah.
They tell you what to do. They create that structure.
Yeah.
There's actually a lot of research around kids of divorced parents are way higher to have likely to have ADHD.
Yeah.
And also kids who struggle to go to sleep well.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting.
Yeah.
Because there's a discipline to getting your kid to settle down, go to bed.
You're coming up against a disease model too. The disease model that wants to attribute all failings of any kind almost to a disease, and therefore your dad comic
you're a victim
would
to the
be.
disease.
Yeah, that's right. And the funny thing about it is, it's not necessarily untrue that the circumstances might create brain chemistry and body responses and challenges, but it can go the other way as well.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. My pop culture comment just to throw out there is intriguing. My wife and I watched over the weekend The Secrets of Skinwalker Ranch. There's 4 seasons of it. We watched basically the first season. And it's pretty interesting, especially, and we'll note it again, Haunted Cosmos, an enjoyable podcast by 2 individuals that are exploring some of the strange phenomena of the world,
Yeah.
and providing alternative understanding that would have its roots in some of the supernatural worldview of the Bible, I would say.
Yep.
And so very interesting. And what I found, I'll just make one comment on it so far, is they start out with this physicist who is clear. They've not been antagonistic toward Christianity in any way, but the guy's a material. He's a scientist, scientific method, everything, observable. Da, 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 da.
He's not satisfied with a spiritual explanation.
And it's not his first thing.
And he
By
shouldn't
the
be,
end of the
right?
first season, he's saying, I don't know what's going on. I didn't expect this. I've never been against mysterious explanations, but I don't want to pursue them first.
Right.
And which I don't mind that. And but they're running into dynamics that they can't explain. Now, the interesting thing I notice after one full season is where they're hinting at is aliens, not spiritual beings.
Of course. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just think, okay, that's interesting. There are some other people on the show that seem more like poltergeistist
Yep.
oriented, spiritual something oriented, not necessarily your classic demon angel kind of idea, but beings, not necessarily planetary travelers, right?
Yeah, I think in the like Wormwood, screw tape letters, the program they're running right now is about the UFOs, and the UFOs are aliens.
Yeah.
Right. And
yeah.
I think that's their deception number one.
I agree with you there.
There's actually a 3-hour interview I listened to with the owner of the Skinwalker Ranch.
Yeah.
He's a Mormon,
Yeah.
which is
Well,
interesting
this
too.
is Utah. Skinwalker Ranch is Utah, and I believe it's a Mormon who owns the property.
No, I listened to a 3-hour interview with the owner. He's a Mormon. Yeah.
Okay. I get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he tells the story. He bought it, skeptical, owned it for 6 to 12 months. Nothing happened.
Which owner? Is it the current right now owner
yeah.
from 2016 or 2020? No, 2016.
Fugit or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was
that's interesting.
It was good.
Well,
it was a good interview. I'd recommend it. It was on Sean Lyon.
Further to come on that. All right, let's talk about a couple other discussion points here. Speaker of the House.
Yep.
We both got an observation here. Let's start with you. What do you got here on?
Well, first of all, can we clarify? Do you know why Scalise stepped down? And those of you who don't know,
he didn't have.
he couldn't get the votes.
He thought he was going to go into the first thing with a runaway nomination.
Right.
And which would have been around, he thought 150. There's 217 House Republicans.
Yeah.
150 going in. He thought Jordan would have much less. Well, he lost 25 to 30 of what he had. He came out with 117 and Jordan had 99. And it was so less than he thought, it discouraged him and he backed out.
Okay.
And then he was willing to support. So in a sense, he took a hit from his expectations and he thought probably he'd reached his ceiling.
Well,
and he thought Jordan
McCarthy 2.0 was trending for a couple days last week.
for a couple days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that's true.
So for those who don't know, Scalise was like the number two for McCarthy, the previous speaker that got rear-ended and sent
guy
out.
who was shot by the crazy.
Yeah, and then
baseball field.
Steve Scalise was. Yeah, that's right. And then Jim Jordan is sort of what we would call not really MAGA Republican, but a true
He's a pit bull.
conservative.
Yeah.
He's a fighter. He's got a background in college wrestling. He was the coach of a Division I wrestling program for a long time, and he's known for that kind of, I'll take the fight to you if I have to. Mm-hmm. But he's not the wheeler dealer backroom kind of guy. But
That's true.
But you can't be the Speaker of the House if you're not.
I know. That is a great question.
Yeah.
So let's start with mine because mine doesn't get us very far. It looks like you might have some more on second thought comments than I do.
Okay.
Mine is just the observation is McCarthy thinks that Jordan will get to the number. He'll get the speakership.
Yeah, I heard
right?
predicted today that it would be tomorrow. They would have it
So
done.
my point is more of an ironic observation, and I'm calling it the fruit of the Gates gambit.
Yeah.
How ironic it will be if Gates, who was crucified virtually for what he's done, well, Newt Gingrich calls him a traitor.
But only among the establishment,
That's fine.
old mind Republicans.
That's fine, but amongst them,
the boardroom,
the ones not friendly still to the. I mean, Newt Gingrich is not a friend of the mainstream media. He was a hated individual. You're right. He's a part of the leadership tier.
But those guys are all in their late 70s.
Okay.
They need to go home anyway.
I hear you.
That's my opinion.
I hear you, but he was nevertheless crucified by
Yeah.
these people. And how ironic it would be if And he didn't do it. He did it out of frustration, with the risk of it having really ceding control to the Democrats. He was willing to risk it. And we
Yeah.
talked about this a little bit.
Right.
And how ironic it will be if it ends up being a more conservative speaker. Right? That's just ironic.
Yeah.
That's
Well-
my only point, is the irony.
Well, I mean, it was a huge gambit. I think that's the right phrase,
Yeah,
Gates's gambit.
Yeah.
To me, from my perspective and the people I follow, it was very divided over whether he made a mistake, Gates, in doing this and what
Yeah.
the timing was. And
Yeah.
some of the most conservative, idealistic House members like Chip Roy weren't in favor of it. Thomas
know,
Massey.
I know.
But they are in favor of Jordan getting it.
Yeah.
So I think that's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
Well, what's your comments? Democracy,
Well, so
autocracy?
I was listening to a sociologist talk about what kind of society falls into civil war,
Okay.
and he said democracies don't really fall into civil war, true democracies, because
Well, are you talking true democracy majority or our democratic republic,
I'm
which
talking
is not a democracy?
free nations.
Okay.
And I
okay.
think because I think that's when people say democracy now, that's really what they mean, right? That your vote counts
Yeah.
for something that. And then he said autocracies also don't fall into civil war because the power is kept in the top, and so you can't, right? There's no civil war potential. It's the ones that are in between. It's the transition times when the power. So if you think of like what was happening in the South before our first Civil War, and it was these elite slave owners losing grip on their ability to keep and own slaves and therefore keep the vote because the slaves outnumbered the white people by a lot, and especially in certain states, especially. And so as that power was slipping away, that's what instigates. So from autocracy toward democracy, well, we're going the other way. And so we're in this weird in-between. And I think the speaker fight is that played out. It's sort of this chaos of like Gates is willing to go over with the Democrats.
Let me state what I think you're saying.
Yeah.
I think you're saying that as we have left a democratic process, especially with cheating and whatnot, elections, and lots of people, the don't vote really doesn't count. You're saying we're headed towards an autocratic style.
Yeah.
And that style is more susceptible to.
The autocracies are not more susceptible to civil war. It's the transition from one to the other. It's when you're in between.
So you're saying
that you risk civil war.
Civil war itself, you're saying that the autocracies of the South began to crumble a bit.
Right.
And in that process, there was the capacity for civil war.
Correct.
Okay.
If power is stable, there's no
One
reason
way or
for
the
war.
other.
That's right. And so if you just look at how much money was transferred from the middle class, I was talking to a friend the other day, and he's quite wealthy, right? He's got assets. He built a business and sold off his share, and now he's reinvested it, and he can live independently wealthy.
Yeah.
But even what he's got, even his income from it, would afford him a nicer house in Portland. Like that's it, a nicer house, right? And when we were growing up, to say I want to be a millionaire is like wow. Now just to own a house, you're at least half a millionaire.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
So the transfer of wealth that took place, and with it the power that goes with it,
So is your
went
comment
to an autocracy. That's what's
is your
happened in
comment
America.
about the transition, or is your comment about civil war potential?
Civil war potential, and that I see
So-
the chaos going on in the House because the House is most reflective of the people, right? More than the Senate or
yes, it's more sensitive to those dynamics.
and so the fact that sides are shifting,
Intentionally so. It was made to be that.
of course, right?
Yeah.
But so you've got if Gates is willing to go to the Democrats to say that's how important it is that our party be conservative, but on the other side, this last week, it was the rhinos saying, "Well, we'll go to the Democrats,
Yep, that's
and
right.
vote for them."
In
and
fact,
put
they
them as-"
went with an offering of what would it take, Mr. Minority Speaker.
and it was an Alabama representative,
yeah.
like the deepest part of the Red South.
Yeah.
That's because that's that old entrenched money that says we're the ones in control.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the what I run into, I don't dispute your observation at all. The dilemma I have with the Civil War comment is all wars, including the Civil War, were fought with most of every side could have a similar or close to similar weaponry. It's not the case anymore. Technology is so imbalanced. The weaponry, and this is Biden's famous comment, we have jets or
Yeah.
nuclear weapons.
Yeah, but
How are you going to do this, you redneck?
can you
folks?
imagine a situation where they use jets or nuclear weapons on American citizens?
I don't know, but it's.
I mean, the Taliban
So
didn't
is
have
that the
jets
pushback
or
that
nuclear weapons, and they defeated the U.S.
disproportionate weaponry will never come in play because it's too gruesome?
Well, I think there is a limit to what the military will do on U.S. soil to U.S. citizens. But what he's projecting is a style of civil war that I don't think is likely, which is that America split into two and establish a secondary government that goes to war with the primary government.
Which is what happened, yeah.
Yeah, no, what you'll see is a more traditional civil war, which is an insurrectionist civil war, where there's scattered fighting throughout different regions with local warlords trying to rise up and take control, and it's chaos on the street.
One of the places where I wondered if this, I've wondered why it hasn't happened so far is the Texas border. Texas has a streak of a sense of independence, and Texas, we're Texas, and the rest of you take notice and shaking your
Yeah,
boots.
but they're on the verge of voting Democrat.
I know they have
every
those
election
dynamics,
the last few
but
years.
they're being overrun and invaded. I have one, and they have made efforts to have their own National Guard uphold things, and then the federals have come in and says you can't do that, and they've backed down from it.
Right.
And I thought, I wonder if there's a place for potential conflict there, and saying we're not backing down. I'm sorry, this is our state border, and
Right.
we are being overrun. And if you're not going to support us, we're going to do something about it ourselves.
So was the claim the Biden administration made a week or two ago that they're going to build a wall? Was that a concession?
That is a great
to that kind
point.
of tension.
That is I don't know the answer to that. I watched that comment and just put it on pause over in the corner to see what would happen, because I don't know if I should trust it or not trust it. I just don't know what to do about that. It was
I
a
feel like
surprising statement.
so many of those kind of statements are just meaningless promises that delay
Floating
the conflict.
balloons.
It's like,
I
oh, we're
know.
going to quiet that down
I know
for a
it.
couple
I know.
weeks.
I agree with that. So I didn't know what to think about that. All right. Well, let's move on to another question here. You got a feminism point here to make. What's your point on feminism?
Well, I think a lot. I had several times as a
Period.
teacher. Yeah, I think a lot about teachers.
Okay.
I had several times, both as a teacher and a principal, talking with a colleague, talking with a friend who's in tears that she has a baby now,
Yeah.
and she thought this was going to be meaningful. That
Yeah.
of all the careers, right? To be a teacher is
Yeah.
pretty meaningful.
Caring for kids.
But now you have this
Big
baby,
influence. Yeah.
and you feel this love you've never imagined
Yeah.
that you would feel.
Didn't know.
And I bought a house with two incomes, and I can't
Yeah.
go home,
Yeah.
and I don't know what to do, and it's breaking her heart.
Yeah.
And I think this was the promise. I just think about it a lot. It
Yeah.
comes to mind. I saw a meme of a woman standing in front of a bunch of cubicles saying, like, I don't need some patriarchy to tell me what to do, and
Yeah.
be a housewife. And then over her shoulder is this like soulless supervisor who says, your 15-minute break is over, go back to work.
That's funny.
And it's like, oh, you're so afraid.
Yeah.
You were so afraid, or you were told to be afraid,
Yeah.
right? That this person you love and commit would somehow dominate you.
Yeah.
But you're trading for that long-term, a meaningless job. And I would argue that most jobs are pretty meaningless
Yeah.
long-term.
Yeah.
But they just keep the wheels turning, and that's okay.
A Genesis
You
comment.
can find meaning in them, but it's,
the brow, the sweat of your brow, there's a vanity in the work we do.
Yeah.
It's not all the way, but it's there.
But to think that that could ever replace, and I think I know where the lie is, that it could ever replace a loving family, right? That is the richest and most meaningful thing a mother can do, right? To care for a baby. No grandma can care for a baby like a mom can do. Definitely no daycare or preschool. Like even when they're 4, you're sending them off to people that don't really care about your kid.
I know.
As good as the teacher as they might be, as expensive as that daycare might be, they're never going to care for your kid like you do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And anyway,
This is a touchy subject. We have some good friends who had their first baby, and after the initial time, mom has gone back to work. They have a little bit of daycare going on, and it completely caught us by surprise that this is a decision they made.
right.
And it actually was quite painful to watch. We care about this couple and their kid, and to see them make a decision that's going to send their kid, like you said, to people literally. They're nice people. Let's just put it in the best scenario. They're nice people, but they don't care about your kid like you do. And the kid knows the difference.
They do. Oh,
The
yeah.
kid knows the difference.
So here's the difference. I was communicating this to someone from church the other day whose wife is pregnant and she wants to go to, get a job, and she went to college for it. Like she invested all this into it, and now I'm going to let it fade, right? And what I said to him, and it was like, I didn't know I thought that until I said it, right? Is that I think daycare and the outsourcing of raising especially young kids is the source of the constant and bleeding insecurity that kids feel growing up through adolescence.
I completely agree with you.
Because that insecurity, the source of it is this sense of, when I cry, does anyone hear?
That's right.
And that's the question.
They talk about kids in childhood development of early stages, connection and attachment, and different things that happen. And one of them in the very earliest stages is that the child sees in the parent's face and their eyes an adoring quality.
And kids know expressions instinctively.
There's
they know.
a name for it now. I don't remember what it is off the top of my head. A certain kind of regard, and that the parent looks at them with this absolute, good, benign regard for them that is healthy and makes the child feel safe and secure and have significance and meaning. And as kind as another person would be, they really don't have that kind of regard for them and esteem for them, and a complete soul extension of the arms invisibly to pull them in and says, you are mine altogether. There's nothing else.
And I actually don't blame feminism 100% for this, because the thing that we were not prepared for as Americans, as humans, was the impact that chemical birth control would have on society. Because, and combine that with technological advances in housework in the last 100 years. Mm-hmm. So a mom was vital to the survival of a family, right? If you're darning socks and washing your clothes by hand and, butchering chickens out in the back and all those manual labor, there's not a moment's rest. There's not hours a day to scroll. Mm-hmm. You just don't have it.
Right.
And then the husband's out doing the same kind of backbreaking, difficult labor. And this was what was required.
Yeah.
And so now suddenly, a bunch of kids, you can decide if you're going to have a bunch of kids.
That's true.
Right? You're not just always pregnant or nursing. You can decide how much work you're going to do on the house. And maybe it's actually pretty easy. And so then, and I think this is part of it too, is when you don't have that, you do, this is a weird thing. So when kids are little, like I talk to my wife about this a lot, and she thinks back to when our kids were little, like the preschool years, with a lot of, like, it was terrible.
Tough.
It was
hard.
really hard.
Mm-hmm.
She was lonely. And I think this is part of also the transportation technology that families have just separated.
Yeah.
So you don't have your mom, 100 yards away, or your sister nearby. I mean, and we actually did. We never moved far from family. More than an hour.
Yeah.
But so you've got emotional work. You've also got this weird downtime. You've got now the phones drawing you in. So all of that angst, all of this, not just on women, but on the family and on kids and how they grow up. It's creating, I think it's creating the culture war. So this is my actual premise, is that parents react to their guilt differently. And so what one parent will do, and this is a more feminine reaction, whether it's male or female, is to react with a hyper empathy of, man, I got stuck and I wasn't the parent I could have been. I see my kids struggling and insecure. And so I'm going to over empathize. Everything wrong with them has to be protected and controlled. And, we keep the bad away.
Make up for it.
Yeah. And defend and protect.
Yeah.
But it creates in them this long-term adolescence that never goes away, right? These spoiled 18-year-old boys who mom still brings them lunch when they forget.
You call it feminine, but dad could be the one to provide
Absolutely.
that. Yeah.
And on the other side, what I call an honor culture, which is not my term, right? But is a culture that is more aggressive. Sometimes people call it, I think it's what they mean when they talk about toxic masculinity, is this win at all costs mentality that I'm gonna make up for my lack as a parent, as a dad, by pushing and driving and making my kids, even whether my kid is a boy or a girl. In fact, I see a lot of dads of daughters getting these girls to be like the champion softball player. And it's like this weird dynamic of she's going to be the winner.
Competitive.
And I think, where's the room to just be a kid?
Yeah.
And I think the reason that our culture is split is because what's designed, God's design, is that the honor and the empathy would be in balance. But instead, they're at war with each other. So you see this extreme of one or extreme of the other, but never, or rarely, I would say, more and more, a balance.
That's interesting. Do you see a question on this then? Do you see a difference between the promise of feminism, let's say,
Yeah.
having a twofold or a two stage or two groups that it appeals to? One group would be this. You can have a career, you can have significance in this chosen field or X, Y, or Z or whatever it is. And so that has an appeal to a woman that is just an appeal to her. But then there's another layer or another stage or another kind, and it's this: you don't want to be forced to have kids. That was your point earlier about the chemical thing. Before that, you get married. I mean, you can't stop it. You can't stop it if you're going to have a baby. And this idea that I've thought about this, one of the difficult things in that mindset before this chemical component that you're talking about is how, in a sense, frightening it would be. As a man, there's nothing that is forced upon you in that sense. If you are indiscriminate in your sexual behavior, the repercussions on you are not the same as if you may have a child that you carry in your body now.
Well, the only repercussions are socially enforced.
That's right. That's right. They're socially enforced. So what I've thought to myself is how much I've noticed in me at times a hatred to be controlled or told what to do. I've often thought to myself I would not have enjoyed or wanted to be in the military. And that wasn't necessarily a healthy conclusion. It was just a conclusion.
Yeah.
But I've thought, boy, I could see where the appeal to a woman's heart would be, I feel powerless. I feel stuck as a woman. I might be saddled with something that I didn't know if I wanted and I couldn't stop it. And especially then, even when our situation, we had 5 kids, one of the things that struck me every time was when you get to the end, and I noticed in the providence of God, the whole little phrase about to pop kind of idea, but this thing that, as I watch a woman, the element of fearfulness. You can't not have the baby. You can't decide, I don't want to do this. This is too hard.
Yeah.
It's too late. It's
in.
happening unless you're open to murder.
Right. Yeah.
And I just thought, oh my goodness, how difficult
Which
that
is
must
why
be.
they would say abortion is so empowering.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if part of the, not a second stage, but there is a different kind of appeal, and that is feminine. You don't have to be powerless like that.
Right.
If you adopt these ideas, then you take back your life.
Part of the sales pitch too is when you hear women, feminists talk about it, society and all that, what's unjust about, is that there's not enough women in positions of like CEO, right? Or senator, as this is the injustice. And I think the sales pitch to young girls is, oh, I'll grow up to be a CEO.
Yeah.
I'll grow up to be a senator and a powerful, and most don't. I mean, most men don't. There's an aggressive determination
That's
required
true.
that 99% of men don't have any.
That's true.
Even close to.
That's true.
The drive to do that.
One of the things I think, another observations, then we'll change topics, is how similar this is to transgenderism, in the sense that it is, so what's happening in transgenderism, one of the pieces is these males with biological muscle structures and testosterone are saying, I'm a woman.
Right.
Now they're competing in a woman's sport and they dominate.
Yeah.
And the reality is that transgenderism from that aspect is dehumanizing women.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, here's what happens in the thing. You can be a senator, you can be a CEO. It's basically saying you can be a man.
Yeah. Yeah. Act like a man.
You can have the drive and the competitive nature and all that takes. You can cut the throat out and the heart out of your enemy. You can beat this other and most women aren't geared to think and feel that way.
Right.
So it's not as if there aren't companies who have women in leadership and CEOs and they function in a different mentality, but what's held out to them is very masculine.
Mm-hmm.
And it's de-womanizing, de-feminizing, in my opinion.
Right. Well, I mean, on its face, all the worst instincts of masculinity, right?
Yes, that's what I think
the
too.
unbridled lust.
Yeah, yeah,
If you could make a list of what sleazy men want women to do,
yeah,
it's almost all included in feminism.
yeah,
Like, go make the money so I don't have to. Sleep with me without consequences, right?
yeah.
And then there's a surprise on the other end that that it attracts sleazy men.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's the other side. Here's something that this sparks in me, and I'm not sure where this comes from or what to do with it. But one of the traits I looked for when I was looking for a wife as a young man, right, or thinking about marriage, was I didn't want a woman who'd only been dreaming about marriage and children. Like, I thought there was a simpleness to that was unappealing.
Okay.
I met my wife, and she had dreams of her own. She had ambitions to be, to have this career and all the things. She wasn't sure she would ever want to get married. And I don't know if it's the challenge, right? If it was like, oh, this is like somebody formidable.
You had to convince.
Yeah, no, that was part of the appeal for sure. But it was someone to be reckoned with, and it felt like a worthy adversary, maybe, and that the other side didn't. There felt to me when I met or knew girls who were really feminine, is what we're saying, right?
Yeah.
There was a neediness that repelled me. And I don't know if that was my immaturity. What's the other side of that? There's a second thought in there that I haven't found yet.
Yeah. It's almost like they have a predisposed yes to the whole arrangement of marriage, and you were looking for a person, you were starting from scratch. They had no yes going on.
Yeah. Well, part of the way I rationalized it at the time, and I don't think it's wrong, is that I want someone who, like, I reject the premise of that romantic, you complete me as a romantic idea. I want someone who's complete, that I'm also complete, that I'm content to be single. I was single for years before I met Nicole. And then we're going to team up, and it'll be better because we do.
Yeah, I hear all that, but let me ask a pushback question to it,
Yeah.
just for curiosity. How do you reconcile what you just said with this idea God saw it was not good for the man to be alone?
Yeah. No. Well, there are people in ministry who have found, and I was someone pursuing or thinking about ministry,
hear you on this.
who said the mission is more important than the comfort of.
Yeah.
The other side of that is
Paul said
having
something to that effect.
He did. Although I'll bring that up in a second.
Okay.
I wasn't saying that I didn't want to get married. What I was saying is that I want to be, if I'm going to be strong enough to lead her well, I can't be needing her to make me okay as a person. Does that make sense?
I do.
And so that's what I hear in the "you complete me" narrative.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying now. Yeah, that's interesting.
Okay, here's something I recently heard. This is we're keying off that a little bit.
Okay, but then we're going to change topics.
The idea that the Apostle Paul was actually married. Have you ever heard this?
No.
I had never heard it, and I looked through the evidence, and it's not unpersuasive.
Okay.
So there's a little passage where, in like Philippians, where he's speaking to someone that he says, my loyal yoke fellow, and it's a woman who he's asking her to negotiate a dispute among two Christian women in the church.
Philippians 4.
Yeah. And so this word could be translated as wife. And if you look through it, when he talks about people being single as I am, the person making this argument was saying, well, he was single because he leaves his wife behind when he goes on these missionary journeys so that he can focus on the Lord, right? Because when you're married, you have to have focus on the happiness of your spouse. I thought it was really interesting. Especially because it undermines the whole Catholic premise of celibacy, which I think is the source of a ton of corruption in the Catholic Church.
That I agree
Not
with.
to mention idolatry. But anyway.
Okay, well, the podcast here connected to the Trinity School. You want to say a sec? Make it short.
So this podcast is part of the Trinity School, which is a culture building enterprise that includes education, but also influence and industry and the arts. Yeah. And if you want to support what's going on at the Trinity School in building communities that honor Christ, you can donate to our efforts by going to gracestaten.com/Trinity School. I had somebody ask for a Trinity School T-shirt. A friend of mine who's a missionary going back to Africa. I made a T-shirt that is like the map of Oregon with a big cross in the middle, and then a bunch of swords pointed in toward the center.
A bunch of swords. Okay.
Yeah, and it was inspired by the cover of the book, A Case for Christian Nationalism.
Oh, all right. All right.
Yeah.
Well, hey, one more recommendation here. We're trying to recommend a little bit of something that we find intriguing. We take turns on it.
Yeah.
And we don't always get to it. We completely forget sometimes. But one of the things I wanted to mention is, I think I may have mentioned it on air before, but it's a book called A Tale of Two Kings, and it's subtitled A Study in Brokenness by Gene Edwards. Had you heard of that?
I think we've talked about it a little bit.
We've talked about it.
Yeah.
It's really about the kingship of David and Saul, but then it's really David as against Saul, as opposed to Saul's kingship.
Right.
And then he later brings in Absalom. And so how David responds to the kingship of Saul.
Yeah.
He's anointed to kingship before Saul is deposed.
Yeah.
And how he interacts with that. Then he has his own kingship, and Absalom rises up to take it over, and yet God never asked Absalom to, and how he responds to that. And really, it's a reflection, in a sense, through a parable-like storytelling process of leadership and brokenness, and how to respond to leadership. One of the questions Gene Edwards keeps asking is, David, he keeps making the point in the first series, the first section, that David thought that Saul was not going to be the king, and that but he was not going to take him out with his own hands. God had to take him out because he was established leadership.
Yeah.
And then he says, I think Saul's throwing spears. And the guy asks these questions. Do you think your pastor's throwing spears, don't you? And he has this dialogue.
Wait. The author of this book speaks to the reader in that kind of break the fourth wall?
It's a storytelling to the reader.
Ooh.
And he's telling the story to the reader. And then he goes back and says, well, here's what was happening over here. And then he jumps in and talks to the reader again. And then he goes back and talks about the story again. And then he goes back to he's going back and forth.
Sure.
And he starts saying, you think your pastor's throwing spears at you. Well, perhaps, maybe he's a mad king, or maybe not. How do you know?
Yeah, who are you to judge?
Who are you to judge? Do you think you're going to take him out? David
Right.
didn't do that.
Yeah.
David says, I will not lay my hand against the Lord's anointed.
Yeah.
And then he ends up going, and the second development is when David has been established, and now there's someone who rises up against him.
Right.
And I'd be intrigued if you'd ever be interested in reading it or ever think to read it, because you might not like the second part, because David, he lays down his mantle of leadership in the face of Absalom's insurrection.
Right.
And Gene Edwards talks about, he calls this humility and leadership.
The guy who was cursing him, he says, how do we know he's not
And
right?
then he brings that in.
Yeah.
How do we know that this isn't what God has done?
Right.
David says, I've made some significant mistakes. Maybe God's taking the kingdom from me. Right?
So I have
Interesting.
I am fascinated by that story. I see
second story,
the
they're
same.
yeah.
I see the empathy and the honor actually dynamic among those two leaders, Saul and David. That Saul was an honor culture. Protect your honor. It's all about winning. When David started winning more battles than him, it was all about how am I going to undermine and attack and defeat this competitor. Right?
Yes, that's right.
Because he was trying to hold up his ego as the centerpiece.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. David, reacting to that, swings that pendulum to the other side. And now when his son is in sin and raping his daughter, he doesn't deal with it. So now Absalom has
Different
to deal
son,
with it
but
and creates and undermines, because Absalom kills his half-brother in vengeance for his
Yeah,
sister
that's
being
right.
raped by
That's
him.
right.
And so David's fault in that is that he went to the empathy side. And it was like, oh, I don't want to make the mistake of Saul, so I make the mistake on the other side with empathy. And it undermines his kingship in that dynamic.
Yeah.
But he does. I think you're right. And I think this is maybe what it's meant, that his heart was after God.
Yeah.
In other words, that he's going to chase after God's heart and let God
Yeah.
make the decision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a great book. Recommended.
I like
All
it.
right, let's change gears. Two things here. Let's talk with this no civic morality, because I mentioned it to you earlier. I don't know if I mentioned on air last time. I'm going to pose a question and you give me your response to it, because we
Okay.
might have different stances on this. I was describing a situation, a civic situation, in which I was asked to provide some input and some moral choices needing to be made. And I was a little feeling unsure of where I was basing it. And so here's my question. Does civic morality, if you're, we've talked about, you've advocated, get involved in your local government. We're now going to use the word Christian localism. I thought that was pretty, actually, I thought that was pretty good. Christian localism and the element of serving in your community as a Christian. If you are then called to help put forward a set of ideas that will apply to your whole town, your whole city, a university, a high school, whatever, you're going to have to do so in such a way that it garners the respect of a wide range of people. Some of them may be Christian like you and some not. On what grounds do you put those things out there? Do you, and I put in my notes here, do you only do theistic grounds, or do you all the way Judaistic grounds, which is a little fuller? There's covenantal aspects in it, or Christian grounds.
If you were Judeo-Christian, let's say, then you would exclude perhaps like Vivek Ramaswamy, who's trying to make a theistic argument.
That's right.
But not as
you would say it's not enough.
He's Hindu, right?
Yeah, and then you would have other people who would say, no, it needs to be Christian in the sense that it's because Jesus is king, or because, and you bring in the full developed message of God in the world, rather than a more limited message because your audience isn't always all going to agree with the more fuller story. Does civic morality find itself rooted? Is it needed? How do you respond to that?
So you're asking almost a strategic question. Is that correct?
It is a strategic, and it is a
because how are you going to make the argument against gay marriage without saying because of God?
There would be some arguments that you have to bring this.
Yeah, you'd have to reach into some research, but it's not. I think
you have to reach no matter what. So I'm starting with a theistic. In my mind, there could be some practical studies show such and such in this issue, on that issue, but at some point there are going to be issues which it's because the God is a creator and made the world to be moral, and there's certain laws that he put in the world.
So the theistic always goes with natural law in your
That's right,
thinking.
And connected to a creator.
Yeah.
When you get all the way
to...
But
the natural law argument was not persuasive when we were debating gay marriage. At least, right, in the sense that in the popular conversation that America was having over this topic.
So for whatever reasons, it did not win the day, right?
Yeah.
It's not natural, was the idea.
I think part of it is the natural law argument is very intellectual, and Americans just aren't.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm not sure where you would go with the fact that it didn't win, but I'm not sure what it proves and doesn't prove. So like you just said, it wasn't persuasive. May not be because it's not persuadable. It may have been other factors that made it not persuadable.
It's a multifaceted
debate. But you're right. It was insufficient for the day.
My thinking is you need a religious fervor that comes from an authentic religion, and that from there, like if Christians say, okay, we want to make a government that honors Christ, but we also are not going to exclude Vivek Ramaswamy, right, who doesn't honor Christ, then you can step back into theism and natural law. But because you have the fervor, the devotion to Christ, it's going to fuel that enough to create those convincing arguments that, right, the political will.
You mean in terms of more people are because there's more people that are fully Christian in its developed component?
Yeah.
You're going to have a larger momentum or inertia,
that's right,
so to speak, in order to have the theistic argument win the day.
Yeah.
You know, I actually think that is exactly true. When I look back, and you and I may differ about some individuals, we may differ about Thomas Jefferson. We can't differ about Ben Franklin because he says I'm not a Christian, right?
So clearly.
So if we just take but he signed on to this moral force in the Declaration of Independence and the development of our nation based upon at least theistic things, and as we've discussed before, a lot of unwritten Christian themes, that the minority should be protected, that you're innocent until proven guilty. These things that are not necessarily, they really come from the heartbeat of developed Christian thought.
Yeah.
You know, mercy is a developed Christian thought and whatnot. And so even if they're not encoded with Christian language in the original documents, you're right. The bulk of the society was persuaded of that fuller developed idea zealously.
Yep.
And everyone swung with them theistically.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
here's a question, though.
I agree. Yeah.
Thinking of Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, a few others, is their renown as pivotal parts of the revolution of the founders, of those who crafted the government, right? Are they only renowned because they aren't devoted Christians? Do you know what I'm saying?
I do know exactly what you're saying.
Especially if in the last 50 to 60 years, as academia has been taken over by Marxists, that they're going to pick among the founders those who are the least God-fearing and promote them as the most significant.
Yeah. I think your point is a good point, but I also think it is 7 years old. Now,
Ooh, what do you mean?
Nobody cares about the left. The progressive left does not appeal to the Constitution in any way whatsoever. They don't want any of them.
They'll throw away George
They
Washington.
throw all of them away.
Yeah, for sure.
It doesn't matter. If they had their druthers, they throw away the entire Constitution and our history with it.
Well, that's the Marxist.
Yeah, that's right.
What we got.
So I think before that, they picked the least Christianized people to support.
Yeah, it's
now
an incremental.
they pick nobody.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, last topic question here.
Okay.
And this is another one for me. I want to make a statement and see what you think about it. Are you familiar with Marshall McLuhan's book, The Medium is the Message?
No.
Okay, 87, I think it was written when TV was becoming big. TV had been around a while, but it was massive. In the 80s, TV developed and new cable came out. It was just, its dominance was, its first stage, if you want to call it the 50s and the 60s and the black and white and the boxes. You know, America is transfixed with this new capacity. But their life still functioned in a way that had been dominated by a reading agricultural climate.
Sure.
It was in transition. By the 80s, that transition was complete, and the media, especially television, dominated public thought, and et cetera, et cetera. So Marshall McLuhan writes and says, the medium is the message. The message is restricted by the medium in which it's told.
Okay.
And we see that when you were talking about the dads and the kid can't pay attention. That's the medium of social media and cell phones. We see that in presidential debates. They're snippets now. They were an hour and a half in a non-television culture for the first speaker.
Right.
Then the rebuttal comes along, right? Our brains, we know, have been rewired because of media, and now we know social media has rewired them even further.
Right.
Okay, so anyway, that's the premise in the book.
But parallel to that, we now have these long form podcasts, right? We have the owner of the Skinwalker Ranch doing a 3-hour podcast
that's true.
I listened to, and many
true.
people I know did.
Well, so that's a different question, and that is, does the changing media run into certain things in human nature it can't buck, right?
Well, I think so. I think there's a
there.
manipulation quality, there's a dumbing down.
Yeah.
But the people's response to that, I remember Jordan Peterson talking a lot about this, that basically he's on this world tour with tens of thousands of people every night coming to see him. Maybe not tens, but 6,000 to 10,000 people, and sellout crowds. And he's just giving a 90-minute graduate level psychology lecture.
Yeah.
And he's a rock star.
And people are craving something.
They're hungry for somebody to think deeply because...
I agree with that.
And so this actually, the media is the message, comes to the idea too of the prediction of, I think an end times prophecy in the Bible about people gathering for themselves those who will teach them what their itching ears want to hear. And the algorithm is exactly that, which is why, like, if the algorithm was manipulative by design, then they wouldn't need to shadow ban. They wouldn't need to kick Russell Brand off or demonetize any controversial figure, right? But the algorithm is designed that what you want to see is what you will see. So then the company that makes the algorithm now has to battle with the fact that people want to see it.
That's right. That's right. Did you see the AI quoting the election was stolen?
No.
AI quoted that it was stolen in 2020.
Yeah.
It shocked them, and they went back and they changed the algorithm.
Right, you're not allowed to say that.
That's hilarious. Okay, well, here's my question. The medium is the message. I think there's a truth there, and I think we probably agree on that. Here's what I ran into when I was at that civic situation, and I was struggling with how far do I take the point I would want to make. Do I ground it in theism? Do I ground it in more? I was asking these questions myself, but I found myself being careful about what I wanted to say. I had something I wanted to say. I wanted to say it. I didn't know the people's quote unquote at the table with me, so to speak. I didn't know where they're all coming from, right?
Right.
Here's what I began to think about what we do here. Here we are, podcast. I thought, you know what? Here's what I noticed. I talk differently if I was talking to somebody about your topic,
Yeah.
the feminism you brought up,
Right.
I spoke to you as if nobody's here.
Right.
That gives me a certain liberty,
Yeah.
a certain freedom that at least I feel. If there had been a feminist, or actually not even just any woman, because feminism does express a complaint, so to speak, that something's not fair here. Something hurts. Something's not right. And I don't disregard that at all. I think it's true. I think the solution is too much, but I think the complaint is legitimate. I think men have a complaint, and I think they're rooted in the fall. But in any case, if there was a woman,
just men are rooted in the fall.
men and women, the complaint that we
The two
both
complaints,
have,
yeah.
and the way it fulfills itself out in how we act towards one another is rooted in these consequences or curses, however you want to view them.
Yeah.
But my point is, whether it was a feminist or even a woman, I would speak, and when you brought up the feminism thing, I would have had a caution in my mind to say,
Right.
speak in such a way that this person hearing me finds a persuasiveness or minimizes what they could be hurt by the word,
Yeah.
right? And now I might be willing to hurt them if needed, but even if I thought I had to say something that might hurt them, if I discern that, I might still say it because I think I'm responsible to, but I would say it as carefully as I could.
Right.
In this medium with podcasting, those concerns are not on the radar.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
that good or bad?
I think it's good.
Really? I
do.
think it's bad. And I thought you might, I wondered where there's going to be some differences between you and I on this.
I mean, I've definitely noticed the same impulse in myself.
Yeah.
Well, I was actually thinking about it today when I was out running about an argument I had on Facebook a while back about transgender bathrooms in our local high school. And I put into this, it was the community page, right? And there was some boys had put up an extra sign, because it says boys and girls. The extra sign says boys only because there were girls who were saying, I'm male, I'm going to go in there. Or I'm not male, trans. And it created this stir where someone went on Facebook and said, our whole town is terrible that it would allow this to happen to this trans girl.
Person, yeah.
Yeah. And I just said, well, why don't we just make the bathrooms about sex instead of gender? Which is is the obvious disconnect of logic in their claims of gender is, gender and sex are totally different. It's like, okay, well then let's just make it about sex for the bathroom. No, it's not like that. And the retort was like, you just need to educate yourself. And then they started saying I was a pervert for caring about kids, going into bathrooms. And it was like, oh my gosh. And I just thought, and these were all recent high school graduates. There were girls who were coming to the rescue, right? So liberal young women. And I thought, do these arguments work in person? Like, are you making these slanders and
that is
people
a great
back down?
question.
Because I'm not backing down. But then I thought, so what I was thinking as I went running today is, if it was in person, would I have been a little more hesitant, right? I certainly would have been, I wouldn't have been as clever. My adrenaline would have been up in a way that it still was,
And
I remember.
your empathy mode to hear and understand,
right?
Not unnecessarily
You're
insult.
not out to harm this person, right?
That's right. I called it the podcasting and faceless audience dynamics.
Yeah.
When the face is in front of you, so here would be my, not pushback to yours, but alternative set of words that would, maybe they'll mesh together, but that God made us to be face-to-face communicators in general. Not saying that there can't be other things, but he made us to care about when I'm talking to you and I see how you respond. Like you're saying no words right now, right?
Yeah.
But I can pick up something by your eyes, by your cheeks, by the smile.
Yeah. If I was mad, you would see it.
Yes,
Right.
and we're meant to get those components of conversation as a part of our general communications. But there are settings in which we don't get any of them by and large.
So the disagreement I have even on that is Paul speaking about how they accuse him of being timid in person, but bold in his absence.
That's true.
Because he's writing these letters, and I think this is where the medium of writing is so vital, because you can process your thinking into depths you can't verbally.
That's right.
When you can stop and write.
That's true.
Even if it's on Facebook.
Yeah.
You have to work at it a little more.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
the other side too is when you are trying to make sure someone understands that you're not out to get them and that you're right, you're balancing these face-to-face conversations.
Okay.
You cannot get to the unbiased truth. I mean, you can, but it's a lot harder.
That's true.
Right?
It's more challenging.
I heard someone argue about like all these laws that are being passed with someone's name attached, right? This is Sadie's law or this is so-and-so's law. What you're doing is you're saying this one case tells us how we should make a law. And almost every time it's not a good law because one case should never make the law.
Yeah. Amber's Law, for example.
And I don't know,
Yeah,
and I
yeah,
haven't read
yeah. I
Amber's
hear what you're
law,
saying.
but the idea
It's
struck
a reaction.
me is that if you're making a law for one situation,
Yeah.
it's going to apply to situations where it shouldn't.
Yeah.
You need to make laws that are like empathy is a bad trait if you're going to make a fair law.
Yeah.
Because you're going to feel everybody and all the sides, and then every decision a leader makes is a trade-off, and you have to make the best decision for the best trade-offs you can. But you're never going to get the perfect.
So what I'm hearing you say is that what writing, which is the illustration, and that's the Paul illustration, it's not
Right.
face-to-face.
And writing is a technology given to us by God.
I agree. I agree with you. I can't dispute that. And so it's a good corrective word that you said, because my temptation would be to say that this podcasting medium, we've developed it in excess of what God has intended, right?
Sure.
That would be the temptation. But your point would be, no, that would be wrong, because writing has similar dynamics, the written word, and God himself used that.
Even more impersonal.
That's right.
Yeah.
So point taken. What I hear you making, what I discern your argument to be is this: if that's the case, face to face is the general way we should communicate. But there are times when the healthiness of writing down the depth you can get to with no reading of the audience is good for the overall discussion.
Yeah.
It gets out there in a sense, this take, let's call it, that is not dependent upon reacting to you. I just put it out there in its fullest developed that I can think of in the moment. Now then we'll have to go back and forth and how did you hear this and whatnot.
Right.
If I hurt your feelings on this, which Paul seems to do, you guys misread me, so to speak, at times, he says.
Yeah. Well,
Is that what you're saying?
I think so.
Read you right?
And
I think that's a good point.
I think of Jesus as his arguments with the opposition were for the sake of the crowd, right? So when I went on Facebook to argue with those young ladies, I had no belief that I would convince them of anything.
Yeah.
What I wanted to do is give words to the people who said, there's something wrong with this, and I don't know what to say about it. I wanted to give them the words to be able to say, oh yeah, that's what's wrong.
So this is very interesting. I appreciate your response. I had not thought of it that way. What I'm taking from that is, and of course I started the conversation with podcasting in a faceless audience, wondering if I was doing a good thing, so to speak.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing you say is, there's a place for having a communication like this. This is not the context. We don't have a room full of ladies hearing the comments about feminism. So
Right.
let's just talk. Obviously, be as sensitive as your words need to be.
We're trying to be reasonable.
We give an account for our words.
Yeah.
But it would be another context that would interact with a person with this set of ideas. In fact, if you have this discussion with these other people, you might never even said as much as we said, which wasn't even a lot.
And the best thing I could think of would be someone that we know personally, or someone I know, would come and say, I listened to your guys talk about feminism, and I have some thoughts, right?
yeah,
Imagine
yeah.
a woman that you or I know
yep,
come and
yep.
I would love that.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's have some thoughts.
Yeah.
I'll bring them back and we'll talk about
And
them
you know
next
what
episode.
else it can accomplish? You just made me realize this. Let's say you hear something you don't like, which we all do.
Sure, yeah.
In a person to person, face to face, if you're starting to say something I don't like and you start to read me that I don't like it, you pause, right?
Yeah.
You're going to back up. You want to convince me in a sense, right? Or bulldoze me, whatever. There could be good things or bad things.
That's right.
But what it does is it interrupts your presentation. You never get to where you were going, and you may never get to where you're going.
Right.
And what that does is it shortchanges me as the hearer, because now my initial dislike of your argument, I never got to hear the whole thing. I never got to have the opportunity to say, oh, that's interesting. I never thought of it that
Well, and
way.
you know this as when
end
you're
of it.
teaching, oftentimes, especially with kids, if you're teaching, someone's going to want to interrupt and say, well, what about
Yep.
And you've already thought of what about. You've got it. That's
Hold
point
it
two,
just a second.
right? Wait on it.
Yes, exactly.
And so, but when it's this heated exchange, you can't.
You might never get to point 2.
Yeah, that's right.
You might never even get to the main point you're trying to make. You never got past setup.
Well, and that's the difference. And actually, we're running short on time, but this reminds me of a conversation because our small group is talking about marriage, and we've been having marriage. How does marriage supposed to work conversations a lot in the last few weeks, both because of small group and friends, and our church is having a marriage conference coming up this weekend. And one of the things I keep coming back to, we watched a video in our small group, and it was a testimony of this husband who was working too much, and the wife was feeling neglected. He thought their marriage was a 10 out of 10, right? He's doing great. She was like, I could leave or stay. I don't even care, right? And then they describe the situation where she confronts him in a romantic environment that he thought he was, showing how much he loves her. He's making, the dinner arrangements, and he's got a poem, and she shoots him out of the sky and says, no, it's not like that. And then they both repent, mostly him, right? But she repents too for holding this resentment. And actually, I thought a really interesting perspective, she repented for putting him in the position of God, that he was going to fulfill all her needs, right? As a spiritual leader and a centerpiece of her life. Yeah. Okay, so then I kept thinking as I'm listening to this, is like, we don't actually know if he was working too much.
I know.
We only know that she thought.
I know it.
And so the thing I kept thinking was, in marriage, it's always a negotiation, but what's the difference between I'm hurt because of what happened, right? When this happened, I felt. That's what we're all coached in marriage, right? That's how you're supposed to communicate.
Yeah.
How do we know it's not self-pity?
Yes. Yeah.
That you're just spoiled and you want more, and you can't get it, so therefore, wham, right?
Yeah.
Versus you're neglecting me, like this is borderline abandonment.
Yeah.
And there's no reference.
My wife and I had something just like that recently. It's happened a couple times the last couple of weeks. My feelings got hurt about a certain matter, but I actually know, after being married 30 years, I know that in this one,
you figured it out.
This is my issue.
Okay.
I already know it is. I know it is. It came through her. The hurt came through her. I want to pull back a little bit from her. Not necessarily her, I know that, but I can't undo that it hurt.
Right.
And I can't undo that the circumstances that brought it up have some painfulness, but she's not the cause of it. She's just communicating. It's not deliberate. She kind of felt bad even, but I needed a recovery time. And so we've learned, I'd say up front, this is not you, this is me. It doesn't undo that I need a little bit of recovery.
Right.
It doesn't undo that. But at least we don't misdiagnosed now in this one. I'm sure there's others are.
It made me think of the times when I will say to Nicole, like, when this happens, it hurts me. Or when you, or maybe even better, when you don't do X, Y, or Z, I feel left out. I feel a negative feeling. Okay. So then she thinks I am doing X, like I did that last week. And I think, but I'm hoping for it every day. Do you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And so now it's just this weird, how sensitive should I be? And then I have to think, if I'm saying, okay, Luke, calm down. You're being spoiled or weak, right? You're being that needy husband like we talked about before. I want to be able to be okay by myself and not just always be needing her to make me feel okay about myself and be the strong husband she needs. And she wants a strong wife that I need. Mm-hmm. Okay. So maybe it's that, but then is that hardening your heart, right? Because you're shutting the emotions down, you're putting the hurt, you're into its cage and it's closing it up. We're going to move on.
It could be, right? But it's also, there's something to this matter of, it is to the glory of a man and a woman to overlook a matter. And in marriage, you simply have to overlook some things and say, I don't know. I'm not going to read it in its first light. And the end of time, God will make everything known. You won't make it, no marriage will make it otherwise.
Right. The thing that dawned on me was, when Ephesians talks about the role of a husband is to lay down his life like Christ, I thought that means laying down the things that hurt me.
It's true.
If it's not for her sake that I bring them up. So if it's not helping her to bring up my hurt, then my hurt just is what it is.
Yeah.
And that's what Jesus literally was hurt for us. Like,
let me close with a Babylon Bee thing, and we'll get off here and leave it. And because we mentioned Amber Law, which is the missing child, California.
Oh, goodness. Yes, I know you're doing.
Amber Law. And did you see that California recently made another one?
Yep.
Called the Ebony Law for black children.
Yeah.
So the Babylon Bee
Oh no.
says, Governor Newsom has asserted strongly, they've made this law, and now they, of course, have this separate but equal law.
Yeah. Because separate but equal is always great. Yeah.
I thought that was hilarious, and we'll end on the poking fun at absurdity.
Did you see Babylon Bee's Man of the Year award this
I
year?
did see that.
Yeah.
Dylan whatever.
Dylan Mulvaney.
Yep. All right. Well, you've been listening to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke. If you enjoyed the episode, found something to reconsider, or had not thought about, share it with a friend. Start a good conversation, and remember to dig a little deeper and think again.